at the point where soldiers who fought against the Nazis are brought down to the same level of respect as a primary school teacher is where we fundamentally disagree with the idea that the glorification of soldiers could ever be regretted in our society, because it literally breaks the fundamental morals this society has been brought up on. I saw this debate in a couple of ways. First, how is the glorifications of soldiers acting as a humanitarian issue further down during the wars? Second, does the glorification of soldiers negatively impact the stakeholders in today's debate? So, I saw the first point of clash in a couple of ways. Are they more likely to rape and do more war crimes during a war due to glorification? Our response to this is quite clear. First, the glorification is drastically mischaracterized within today's debate, where glorification is somehow supposed to be a justification for doing war crimes on the opposing team. This is simply wrong. Glorification, in its essence, is when you tell a soldier that their lives weren't meaningless, that the years that they spent protecting their country were actually a fundamental good thing, and that they didn't waste their time losing limbs, getting shot for absolutely nothing at all. It's where you tell a soldier that we're proud of them, that their country is proud of them, that they should be proud of themselves, and that they've done a good thing for our society. That's what glorification looks like. It looks like giving accountability to people who've actually committed these war crimes, because we get more public buy-in. When people glorify soldiers, when they support them, they're more incentivized to push back on the real war crimes that are happening, because they understand that soldiers were important. They're not to be commoditized in this debate. Second, the glorification of the soldiers are more likely to actually act as an incentive not to do these war crimes. Why is this? Because of the simple fact that when you're glorified, you're more likely to know that I shouldn't be doing these war crimes. I shouldn't be doing anything as unethical as possible, because you know that you're held up to these high standards. You know that you're held up to the standards of a moral hero, that in the eyes of the children around the world, you're someone who's protecting your country, you're someone who's saving the world. Those are the standards that soldiers are now put up to. So their first thought isn't to just go into the streets raping as many women as possible. It's to think, how can I help civilians immediately get off the street? Because I'm a soldier, I'm a hero. That's what society has told me is my purpose. To be a hero is what we have done to glorify these soldiers, and that is intrinsically better on our side of the house, because there are less war crimes happening. It's not a justification, it's less of an incentive to act unethically during war. Second, they made the response that if a few soldiers are hurt, that means that there's going to be a much more drastic, sort of approach to the war. We're immediately going to send missiles because our glorified soldiers have now been hurt. Why is this wrong? First, this happens on either side of the house, and it doesn't really matter, because when you have soldiers that are completely innocent in terms of moral standing, when you have a soldier who's decided themselves that they're going to go over to Iraq, they're going to help fight in the war because there are people who are there who are wrong, who are doing things wrong to the citizens, but to other people, that is when they are killed, that the military is going to intervene even more. It wasn't because that soldier was glorified, it's the main fact that they were an innocent person who was fighting for something that was a good cause, and that causes public outrage. Not because in the past we've glorified soldiers, telling them that their lives were actually meaningful, that they made a successful contribution to society. That is what glorification is in its essence, and not a justification to do any of the the cruel harms that the opposing team has tried to push on us today. Two, this means that there's going to be this won't sacrifice the heroes. What does this mean? It means that we're not going to actually send more heroes who we've deemed as very good, who we've glorified. Why would we send these glorified soldiers, these veterans, back into a war? This doesn't make sense at all, because at the point where you love these soldiers, where our society loves these soldiers, where they support the soldiers, is when we don't want to send them at any cost. It's the last option, having to send more soldiers over to a country to fight a war that both sides know isn't good for anybody. And that's why intrinsically we've won this humanitarian issue point, because first of all, we've proven the idea that when soldiers are glorified, they're held to high standards. They're more likely to work ethically even during times of war, and it means that there's going to be less drastic measures because we don't want to send our glorified heroes over to Iraq just to be shot. Okay, so the second point of clash here is on if the glorification actually negatively affected the stakeholders. So the first stakeholder is obviously the soldier itself. Now they told us that there's going to be an increase in coercion by the government on these soldiers. Our first response is to say that glorification in the past happens in most cases not the coercion happens in most cases not because of the glorification, but because there's an agenda held by the government. This glorification doesn't necessarily arise from the government pushing this idea. It can come from like society seeing the soldiers come back on a ship. They're crying. Mothers are hugging their sons because they've seen them after a long time. This is where the glorification has arisen, and this is a fundamental good thing. It's actually very cruel for the opposing team to just assume that all glorification occurred because of propaganda, when people can actually have feelings, when people can actually just accept that they support these soldiers for the good things that they have done. Now second, the glorification is very different from propaganda. This means to say that propaganda is when you tell somebody that if you don't go to war, then we're going to kill you. That if you don't go to war, you're not a man. That is what propaganda is. Glorification is a very different aspect in this debate. It's where you tell somebody that their lives weren't meaningless. We have to be able to make this comparison and see the difference in glorification and propaganda for us to be able to successfully win this debate. Because opposition tries to push and merge these things together, but they simply aren't. Third, coercion and propaganda is not even noticeable in the status quo anymore, because at the point where we're a well-modern and civilized society, we don't use propaganda as much as we did in the past because we know it was wrong, but we just glorify soldiers as provide more of an incentive for these soldiers to go, because at the end of the day, we do need soldiers to go. Now, looking at the societal stakeholder, they haven't really touched up on why it's going to be better on their side of the house, but we're still going to provide substantial material on this. So first, it helps educate our young about the detriments of war at the point where you tell them that these soldiers had to go through extremely bad things and bad situations, all for the peace of the world. That means that students are more likely, second of all, to be able to appreciate their lives more, to know that their lives had to come from somewhere, that the soldiers fought for their protection, fought for their freedom, fought for our liberty. It also means that we get more public buy-in, because that means that when the society supports the soldiers, when they glorify the soldiers, they're going to push back on the harmful and true hate crimes and war crimes that are actually happening that negatively affected their beloved soldiers, so that the real people accountable are actually getting negative consequences upon them. We firmly win, first on the principle, but second on the tangible outcomes in this debate.